If Columbus had not found gold on his first trip in Hispaniola, then he would not have received any honors on returning, and there would have been no future voyages. So everything depended also on finding gold there. And if he hadn't done that, that would have been the end of it. Well, of course not. Eventually someone else would have gone, but it was, so they would not have shown any real interest if there had not been any gold, because part of the power of Spain was to get this gold. What about the church? What were the motives for the church? Well, they were really solely supernatural. In 1493, Pope Alexander VI, he issued these three famous bulls awarding the New World to Spain and to Portugal so that she could evangelize it. So the whole point was to divide up the New World between Spain and Portugal, saying, you've got the job, the responsibility to evangelize this part, and you have the responsibility to evangelize the other part. So from the very beginning for the church it was clear, and Christ had commanded his disciples to go and convert all nations. The great debate over the humanity of the Indians was sparked by the colonists who had to deal with them, and who in many cases, as I say, they were slow, mentally handicapped in many ways, and they were due to undernourishment, and they were so primitive that any attempt to get them to work in any orderly way completely failed. And as you know, it failed so miserably that they began to bring slaves from Africa over. They were not able to get the Indians to work in any sort of systematic way in the mines or on the farms there. So the solution was to bring Africans who were very hardy, very strong, a lot of stamina. And so the slave trade started in Latin America for that reason, that the locals were not able to work. Now, because some of the colonists continued to treat the Indians unfairly to maintain that they were not completely human, in 1537, as we saw the other day in our talk on slavery, Paul III issued this bull, Sublimus Deus, declaring that the Indians are truly men, they're capable of being converted, and that they are not to be enslaved, and so forbidding the enslavement of the Indians. So you have a very clear statement from the Catholic Church, from the Pope himself, from the very beginning of the slave trade, condemning it. So those who say that it wasn't condemned until much later or simply don't know the facts. The issue didn't die there. Philip II held a great debate in the year 1551 in Spain between Bartolomé de las Casas, who was a great defender of the Indians and the rights of the Indians, and a theologian called Sepulveda, was his name, on the question as to whether or not the Indians were inherently inferior, and so whether they could be enslaved or not. So this great debate took place, and Las Casas clearly won it. But for the church, even though these were two churchmen who were debating, for the church itself there was no question. They began converting the Indians from the very beginning. Why did the colonists, the conquistadores, and the religious, and why did they go? We always say in studying this question that they went for the three G's: God, glory, and gold. Those are the three reasons. I've got three quotes here from short quotes. And Pizarro, who conquered the Inca Empire, he said the following: I have not come to the New World to teach the faith, but rather to take the Indians' gold away from them. So his motive was clear. Las Casas, he said, and many other religious, they stated that their aim was to preach the faith to the natives so that they might be saved. So the religious had that, God was their motive. Bernal Diaz, who was the biographer of Cortez, who accompanied Cortez during his whole time in Mexico, he summed it up by saying, we came here to serve God and to get rich. So there was that mixed motive among these people. So what really happened? Well, until 1518, the Spaniards are in the main Caribbean islands, in Cuba, Hispaniola, which today is Dominican Republic, and Haiti, in Puerto Rico. They subjugate those islands thoroughly, and because of disease, most of the inhabitants die very quickly. Cortez goes off to Mexico in 1518, and in 3 years he conquers it. Between 1518 and 1521, he conquers the entire Aztec Empire. He conquers also, or the Spaniards conquered the Yucatan Peninsula from the Maya by 1545, and the Inca Empire was conquered by Pizarro between 1531 and 1548. So by 1570, the greater part of Latin America has been conquered and settled. And the borders have been drawn. The Amazon on the one hand, there's a very fierce tribe in Chile called the Araucanians. And I've read a lot about them. They would not give up. They would not be taken prisoner. They were very, very fierce. And in the north, it was the Apaches. They were also a very fierce race, and they fought to the end. So by 1570, the Indian population has been devastated, completely devastated by disease, not by war, but by disease. And they had no defense against the flu, the common cold, the smallpox that the Europeans brought. It just wiped out the population. And again, nobody knows what percentage. It was probably at least 2/3 of the people that were wiped out. Some people say 90%, but again, when you talk to, when you look at the similar thing of the Black Death in Europe, it probably wiped out 1/3 of the population. Some people think it was probably the same thing, maybe 1/3 of the population of the Indies. But I've read these people, they don't know. I mean, it's all speculation. For some reason, they don't seem able to get their facts down here. So what happened? Well, the slave trade started. So then they started importing slaves from Africa. And the slave trade, as we saw, was condemned by the Vatican, so the church did not take any part in that. Now, some say that the Spaniards in the New World were caught in a dilemma. On the one hand, they'd been mandated, they had the call to convert the Indians, and that required peace. On the other hand, they wanted to conquer the land and take its wealth, and that required war. So what do? Well, in fact, it turned out that conquest was necessary in order to convert, because any peaceful attempt to convert the Indians always ended up in a massacre of the missionaries. So they had to, first of all, pacify an area, and then they would send in the preachers to convert them. How did they go about this? Well, they started up a system called the encomienda. In its broad outlines, it was instituted by Isabel, and it was to reward the conquistadores who had spent their personal fortunes financing their voyage. Isabel financed the first voyage, but no others. And so each conquistador had to finance his own voyage. But when he did that, he was granted lands in these conquered lands. He was given these lands in order to reward him, to pay him back for his investment. So, as a general rule then, encomienda, it was a group of Indians were entrusted to a Spaniard on a piece of land, and they received, the Spaniard received tribute from them. He was responsible for evangelizing them, instructing them in the faith, and protecting them. So that was the idea, by law. That was the law, that's what the law said. So they grouped the Indians together so they wouldn't be spread out. The Spaniards had this idea very clear. Right? We have a superior civilization. These people need to be civilized. So they went there with that presupposition. They never doubted that for a second. Their culture is barbaric. They're pagan. They need our help. So we're going to civilize them. They went there, and there was absolutely no hesitation by anyone that this was true. People today are calling that into question, but at that time, that was the supposition. So they then created Indian villages where they could be civilized, they could be converted, and each of these villages was entrusted to a Spaniard who had a good reputation. He was responsible for protecting them and evangelizing them, to protecting them against the slave traders, because other Spaniards would come in and grab these people and put them in the mines or whatever. So they were supposed to be protecting them. And also, by law, they were to ensure that the Indians who were working on this piece of land or around the village, they were supposed to be paid a just wage for the work that they would do. So Isabel stipulated that the Indians had to be treated as free persons and not as slaves.